They were nothing but bargaining chips. Two alien girls sold by a drunken trader for a single drink, their eyes hollow, their futures already written in pain, until a human man stepped in, not to use them, but to rescue them. He didn't touch them, didn't command them, just gave them warmth, food, and a place to feel safe. For the first time in their lives, someone saw them as people, not property. And now, no matter where he goes, they follow him, not because they owe him, but because they trust him. More than anyone in the stars. He hadn't meant to change anyone's life that night. The bar was half dead and reeking of old ale and regret, and Maddox just wanted something warm to drink and quiet to sit in, but fate doesn't knock when it's about to hit you with something permanent. It just shows up looking like a half-collapsed trader slumped at the counter with two shackled girls slouched against the wall behind him and a bottle clutched in one hand as he slurred nonsense to the bartender. Maddox didn't pay them any mind at. First, there were always girls like that on the fringe planets. Eyes hollow, bodies marked with faint bruises like fingerprints on old fruit, until the drunk slammed his hand down and shouted to the room, 10 creds for both or one strong drink and they're yours, and the place went silent just long enough for every man in the room to decide they weren't interested in the responsibility of living cargo. Maddox's cup paused halfway to his lips. He turned slowly and looked at the girls. One tall and gray, skinned with soft stripes down her arms and a torn dress barely clinging to her. She stared forward unblinking like a doll left in the rain. The other smaller, chestnut-skinned with violet eyes and short cropped hair trembling in a way that made his gut twist. He didn't move at first, just watched the drunk finish the last of the bottle and laugh to himself. And then something deep and sharp, pushed Maddox off the stool and toward the bar. He reached into his coat, pulled out a flask of Trakenfire, aged and smooth and worth more than 10 creds easy. He slammed it on the bar and said, "This'll do," and the drunk grinned, reached for it and waved his hand at the girls. "Take 'em, I'm sick of feed-im," and Maddox didn't wait for anything else. He stepped over the filth and knelt in front of the girls. He didn't touch them, didn't grab them, just spoke softly, "You can come with me if you want, I won't hurt you. You'll be safe. If you say yes, I'll take you out of here. If not, I'll leave you alone. And come back later alone for help. I swear that." The tall one blinked slowly and looked at the smaller girl, and after a breathless pause the smaller one nodded and whispered, "Yes," and Maddox stood slowly and held out his hand, not forcing, not hurrying, and when they both reached out to take it something shifted in the air like the bar itself held its breath and then looked away. He led them outside into the bitter cold and the silence of the night. His ship wasn't far, just a battered hauler docked near the waste yard, but it was warm and stocked and clean, and as the door hissed shut behind them he turned and said, "This is yours now, no cages, no locks, just rooms and food and privacy. My name's Maddox, I won't ask yours until you're ready." He handed each of them a thermal blanket and some protein packs and backed away to the cockpit. He didn't sleep that night, just sat in the pilot chair listening to the quiet, expecting the door to hiss open and for them to run. But they didn't. In the morning he made tea and slid 2 mugs onto the table and returned to his tools. When he glanced over he saw the smaller girl sipping slowly, her eyes locked on his hands while the taller one hovered beside her like a silent shadow. He didn't push them to talk, didn't ask questions, just worked and gave them space, and by the third day the smaller one spoke. "My name's Rinya," and her voice cracked like old glass and he only nodded and said, "It's good to meet you, Rinya. Thank you for trusting me." Later the tall one murmured Nyari, and that was all he needed. He wrote both names down and saved them like rare songs. By the end of the week they were following him from room to room, asking questions about the ship, about the planets he'd seen, about why he'd taken them. He always gave the same answer: "Because you deserved better than what he gave you. Because no one should be left like that." And every time he said it they watched him like they didn't understand, like they were waiting for the catch, for the moment when kindness twisted into ownership, but it never came. He never touched them without permission, never raised his voice, never treated them like anything but guests, and slowly their shoulders uncurled and their steps grew lighter and the shadows in their eyes began to fade. Rinya started helping with systems diagnostics, asking sharp questions and learning faster than most engineers Maddox had trained. Nyari was quieter, but when she found the old galley garden she began growing things, flowers at first, then herbs, then food, and the day she brought him a bowl of steaming roots seasoned with something sweet and earthy she said, "This is what my mother used to make," and he accepted it like a gift of gold. Days turned into weeks and they didn't leave. They made up bunks near his quarters, shared meals, repaired modules, and watched old vids on the projector screen curled up under blankets. Rinya laughed louder than anyone he'd ever met. Once she let herself, and Nyari sang under her breath in a language that sounded like wind in the trees. Maddox found himself smiling more, sleeping better, waking up grateful and confused and terrified because he didn't know when they'd decide to go. He wanted them to be free, truly free, but the thought of walking into the ship and not seeing them there made his chest ache. One night while repairing the NAV console, Rinya sat beside him, legs swinging off the edge, and said, "You're not like anyone we've met before. You don't look at us like we owe you something." And he replied, "You don't," and she nodded slowly. "Still we don't want to go," and he blinked surprised, and she grinned, "We like it here, we like you." And Nyari appeared in the doorway holding a mug of tea and said softly, "We feel safe with you." And that night as he sat in the dark watching them laugh over some ridiculous vid about an alien cooking show, he realized he hadn't just rescued them, they'd rescued him too. From loneliness, from numbness, from drifting through space with no reason to care, and now. Every choice he made, every system he upgraded, every job he took was with them in mind. Their comfort, their security, their happiness. He added bunk privacy seals and biometric locks so they could feel safe, built a small studio for Nyari to plant things and painted the walls with stars so Rinya could map their travels, and slowly the ship transformed from a transport into a home. Not because of furniture or tech, but because of the warmth they brought, the laughter, the soft presence of lives healing. Together, Maddox never claimed them, never asked them to stay, never made promises, but he showed up, every day, every hour, quietly, consistently, and in doing so he proved more than words ever could, that not all humans saw them as property, that someone out there would choose to care without condition, and that made all the difference in the world. They never asked for more, yet Maddox gave it anyway, not in things but in space, in trust, in the quiet way he remembered how Rinya liked her tea sweet and Nyari liked her workspace left undisturbed. The ship became more than a vessel. It became a world with rooms that felt like safety, hallways that echoed with laughter instead of footsteps meant to patrol or punish, and though Maddox never spoke of it, they both knew the nightmare still came. Rinya had caught him one night bent over the sink, breathing too hard, eyes wide and haunted as if ghosts from another life had clawed their way back into the light, and she didn't speak, just walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek to his back, not to fix it but to remind him he wasn't alone, and slowly the trembling in his hands stopped. Nyari too in her way would sit beside him in silence, and when his walls cracked open she never looked away, never flinched, just stayed until the pieces settled and the storm passed, and Maddox began to realize what they had was no longer temporary. It wasn't something built out of pity or debt, it was a family forged in quiet defiance of everything the universe had done to them, and the galaxy around them noticed. Word spread on the subchannels of a freighter crew that didn't deal in cargo or coin but in rescue, in repair, in kindness, and more than once Maddox found coded messages waiting in docking bays. "Help me, save them, please," and every time he looked at Rinya and Nyari, and every time they nodded without hesitation because no one else should be left the way they had been. Their first real mission was a back alley raid on a mining colony where two young girls were being sold off for mineral rights, and when the smoke cleared and the girls stood shaking behind them, Nyari wrapped them both in her coat and said, "It's over now, you're safe." And Rinya stayed up all night talking with them, calming them, cleaning their wounds, telling them stories not of what had happened to her but what came after, and Maddox watched her and felt something burn behind his eyes because he had never been prouder. Missions became routines, small rescues, supply drops, networking with former slaves now turned informants. Everywhere they went people began to recognize them, not just the human and his two alien crew, but the ones who gave a damn, the ones who never asked for repayment, the ones who made broken things whole again. And with each act of compassion, each moment of defiance, their bond grew deeper, stronger. Rinya started sleeping in the cockpit beside him, legs curled beneath her as she plotted new routes and teased him for his outdated charts. Nyari began humming again, planting herbs with purpose and leaving fresh meals in the galley with notes that simply read "eat." And sometimes at night when the stars hung low and the engines purred steady beneath their feet, Maddox would feel a weight press against his shoulder. Rinya or Nyari, or sometimes both, and they wouldn't speak because nothing needed to be said, not anymore. And then one day everything changed again. A coded alert came through from a sector long avoided by most. An auction was being held, one that catered to buyers too powerful to be touched, too discreet to be named, and Maddox knew what it meant. Knew going there would mean stepping into shadows thick with danger. But when he looked at Nyari, her jaw set, and when Rinya pulled up the coordinates with eyes like fire, there was no question. They were going. They prepped in silence, loading stun rifles and medpacks, disabling ship IDs and planning escape routes. This wasn't a mission, this was war, but not with bullets or ships, with truth and fury and a promise made long ago to never let it happen again. When they arrived, the air stank of perfume and power and bodies bought too easily. Maddox wore a borrowed coat and a blank expression. Rinya posed as his handler, Nyari his consort, and together they moved through the halls of whispered bids and hidden sobs until they reached the holding cells. What they saw nearly broke them. Children, elders, people barely clinging to life, all tagged with prices as if their worth could be reduced to numbers. And when one of the guards grabbed Nyari too roughly, Maddox didn't hesitate. He snapped the man's wrist and shoved him through a wall, and the alarm screamed like a dying god. The fight that followed was fast, brutal, silent, and when the last buyer ran screaming and the cells opened wide, Maddox stood at the center, bloodied but alive, and shouted, "You're free now, go," and they did, stumbling at first, then running, then flying. And in the aftermath, when authorities arrived too late to stop it but not too late to take credit, they found a name scrawled on the wall in oil and blood: Sanctuary. And from that day forward that's what they were known as, the ship, the crew, the legend, Sanctuary, for those who had none, for those no one else came for. And though they never stayed in one place long, their trail was marked by hope and healing. And stories told in hushed awe, the human who traded a drink for two girls and ended up with a mission, a family, a reason to live. And for Maddox it was never about being a hero, it was about never letting another soul feel what they had felt, abandoned, unwanted, unseen. He made sure of it every day, in every word, in every touch, in every choice. And one night years later, after another rescue, after another half-broken girl cried herself to sleep in the warmth of a room they built, Nyari sat beside him on The Deccan took his hand and said, "We love you, you know," and Rinya leaned over from where she'd been stargazing and added, "Not because you saved us but because you stayed," and Maddox swallowed the lump in his throat and whispered, "I didn't know I needed saving too until you wouldn't leave," and that was the truth, the most beautiful truth he'd ever known, that sometimes family doesn't find you in the places you expect. It finds you in the silence, after pain, in the arms of those who choose to stay, and in the shadow of what was once a simple drink. Two girls who had been sold like objects had become the fiercest protectors, the brightest lights in the darkest places, and they never left his side, not once, not ever.